New information has emerged about the drone strike that killed 3 U.S. troops and wounded dozens in Jordan. It sounds like the Iranian militias are getting a lot more sophisticated. We're going to talk about the tactic they used and what it means for U.S. forces. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, first, I wanted to just break down kind of the overall situation. Now, a U.S. official kind of speaking off record has gone to journalists and disclosed a number of interesting details about this attack. Primarily that the Iranian-backed militia's drone was able to penetrate U.S. air defenses by trailing a U.S. drone that was returning to the base in Jordan. Right? Now, the source claims the attackers saw an opportunity and exploited it. But I think it's a little more complex than that. And this is kind of the reason why. So simultaneous to this attack, right, another U.S. base at Al Tanif, this is just a few kilometers north of Tower 22, was also attacked, but it was actually stopped by a counter drone system, which I think is pretty interesting, called the Coyote. Sorry, too much immigration news. And as you can see, the Coyote is actually a tube-launched drone interceptor, right? It's launched out of an MATV, pops out, and basically seeks and destroys existing drones, as well as some other. It has other payloads, but it's mostly defined as a slow-moving air defense drone. And as you can see, it's it's not like a cruise missile, but it's like a baby cruise missile, right? Perfect for taking out drones and identify and eliminate other UAV threats. And the thing is, though, why was this unable to stop the Houthi drone that approached Tower 22? Again, the answer seems to be that it was just a perfect set of timing. And here's why I'm sort of a skeptic. First off, in this interview, they interview Joseph Votel, who is a former commander of CENTCOM, and particularly the region that this base, Al Tanif, and all the U.S. operations in the Syria region sort of fall under. But he claims that this base houses only 300 to 350 troops. Well, if you were on the live stream, you know that this is the footage or the overview of Tower 22 as of last year. And as you can see, there's dozens actually of these large huts, as well as dozens of these small huts. And based on my experience, right, each one of these huts likely holds 8 to 10 soldiers, meaning that there's easily about 1,000 troops, is at least what this base has the capacity to hold. And that seems about right. You know, it's large enough. You would not build, for example, a basketball court, pickleball court, if you had just 350 troops, right? I was at a 350 troop FOB for most of my deployment, and this is vastly more extensive. We had a single helipad, and this base has, looks like about eight and growing. It also has a large maintenance shed. It has a large fuel point. Actually, I think these are the fuel points here. But you can see this is not the infrastructure of 300 troops. This is more like 1,000 to 1,500. And what also is relevant to this, right? You can also see this looks like a flight line. In fact, this image here may actually be blacked out, but it may be a drone preparing to launch. And that is, I think, what these Iranian militia exploited. Now, here's the thing. The question you have is likely the question I have, which is, how on earth does an Iranian militia know that when a U.S. base in Jordan, it's not that they've launched a drone, but that the drone is returning, right? Because here's the thing, guys, right? We can all see when an aircraft leaves, but unless you have access to the radio frequencies or unless you have access to high-end radar, you can't see that drone return, right? You don't know it's returning to base. Could be leaving on a 4-hour mission, could be leaving on a 1-hour mission, could be doing a test flight on some maintenance that's going to be 30 minutes in the air. You don't know what exactly is going on unless you're an insider. And so the only way to know that that drone was on its way back to Tower 22 is if you had access to some sort of aircraft radar in Jordan or in Syria. And that is sort of troubling, right? Because up until now, we've treated these Iranian militia as amateur hour, as a bunch of rabble rousers who are being provided high-end equipment by the Iranians, but not really much more. And this indicates to me, troublingly, that there is some more sophisticated coordination happening here. Someone with access to either the detailed operations about the movements of drones on the base, which I really don't think is likely, right? The U.S. is not sharing their drone operations with local nationals or even likely partner forces. But it's possible that, for example, the U.S. may have had to tell Jordan, right, or Jordanian's Air Force to say, hey, listen, heads up, we're launching a drone, time now. It's expected to be a 4-hour mission, so don't shoot it down when you see it. And so maybe somebody in the Jordanian Air Force then leaks that information to the militia. But again, that would imply that the militia has an extensive intelligence penetration of U.S. allies, which is, again, very sophisticated, right? That's something we would expect from maybe Iran, right? Iran itself, like the Revolutionary Guard Corps, they might have a large number of sources throughout Middle Eastern militaries. But I wouldn't expect some random, army of the sword or whatever they're calling themselves to have this sophisticated intelligence apparatus. The other option is, of course, that these militia have access to their own aircraft radar. Most drones that the U.S. flies are not stealth aircraft. They're easily detectable by radar, and that if they entered Syrian airspace, it's possible that a radar installation may detect that. And then if they knew that, right, they'd be able to sit there and look and say, okay, look, here it goes. The drone's flying here and it's turning around and returning to base. Here's the other thing, though, is that it's possible that these militia were simply waiting on standby, right? That they knew that they were going to wait until the drone came back and that they were going to launch their drone right at that perfect window. But it is not a trivial matter to launch a combat drone, especially if you are one of these militia who rely on kind of hit and run tactics, right? So the longer they sit, if they sat there for 12, 14, 24 hours waiting a text message from their radar or from their Iranian handlers to say, okay, the drone's coming back, launch it now, that's a pretty big liability for them. So that they were probably either prepared and ready to go, waiting this window of opportunity. Of course, it also implies that whoever was feeding them this strategy may have known or suspected that sort of fitting their drone underneath or into or adjacent to the radar signature of a second U.S. drone would have been a successful tactic, right? Because you would think that perhaps if a U.S. air traffic controller at this base were to say, hey, there's 2 drone signatures, your drone is being trailed by another drone, you think that would have sent up some alarms, that they would have either said, hey, keep this drone airborne, don't bring it back to the base, do an emergency landing somewhere else, right? That you would know. You would say, listen, we can't have this drone targeting us. So we're going to talk about why I think the U.S. can counter this threat. But if you are like me and you're looking to achieve more this year, 2024 is going to be the year for you to get things done, hustle harder, hit the gym. You need a secret weapon. And that my secret weapon, not a counter drone radar, but it's Strike Gum. Strike Gum is, of course, inspired by my time in Afghanistan, right? I used to carry around a bunch of energy drinks on patrol. I'm not making this up. And I would drink them like they would be warm, and carbonated. They were so gross. And they were paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. because the taxpayers paid like $4 for each of those drinks, which is what they cost now at the gas station. So this is a much more affordable alternative that gives you the exact same amount of caffeine, 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece, plus 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, zero sugar, and you just pop in one of these little pieces and you get all the rush of an energy drink with none of the carbonation, sugar, or inconvenience. So if you're interested, check us out, strikegum.com. We have military discounts, first-time customer discounts. You want to check it out. We have dozens and dozens of 5-star reviews. It's been awesome. So check us out, strikegum.com. Okay, so here's how I think the U.S. could have its best strategy to counter this. The first is that they have to take these militia groups more seriously. They have to recognize that these are not amateur groups. They may even not be fully militia. They may be well-trained Iranian guardsmen who are simply donning militia uniforms or even militia identities to launch these sophisticated attacks. Right? In Yemen, you saw them use anti-ship ballistic missiles, a piece of technology that no nation state has rolled out in combat yet. Now you're seeing these sophisticated drone tactics, shadowing friendly drones, right? This is very sophisticated stuff. We need to start treating them like a real sophisticated threat, right? The U.S. for too long, and then we did the same thing in Iraq, right? We treated the Iraqi insurgents as a disorganized rabble, but they weren't. They were a decentralized but very sophisticated guerrilla force. And it took us years and a lot of casualties before we gave the insurgency the respect it warranted. And once we did that, then we were able to really apply the solutions, the tactical and operational solutions to counter them. But we had to respect them first. And we have to now start to respect these militia as a real enemy. So what does that mean? That means, of course, U.S. bases need improved defenses. We need protocols to make sure these drones don't simply get tailed and followed in. So that means friend and foe identification, reliable transponders, or just simply a really good flight plan that everyone's aware of and minimal toleration for deviation. Remember, these are drones. Like, they're expensive, but if you don't know whose drone it is, shoot that MFer down. It's not a manned aircraft. You can blow that thing up and it won't be a big deal. That's the whole point of drones. You also need to go on the offensive. You have to build out an intelligence profile. What do these militia look like? Who are they? Where do they operate? Where are they funded from? And we saw this, right, with these Navy SEALs in the Red Sea doing it against Houthi rebels, right, who were trying to interdict the Houthi rebels' supply lines, right, their ability to get supplies from the various Iranian sources. But that's where we have to hit these militia too. And it means that we need to rely on our partners, right? And here's the challenge, right? You could see that there's an element of this that could have come from within Jordan, from within Iraq, from within Syria. You see how complex this issue is. And it becomes very difficult when we talk about these multinational efforts, because every time, as we said, the Iraqis, the Jordanians, Syrians, they could all be compromised from an intelligence perspective by Iran, or even worse, someone like Russia, who might be, who has an interest in not so much harming U.S. interests in the Middle East, but creating a distraction, right? The U.S. is always going to work harder to protect its own troops than protecting, for example, Ukrainian troops. So to Russia, if they can, for a relatively low cost, partner with someone like Iran to distract or obfuscate, really distract U.S. public and government officials to view the Middle East as the place where their focus needs to be, it's going to pull it off of Ukraine. And I think any one of those scenarios is possible, but it only will work if the U.S. is able to actually counter these militia. Now, personally, as I talked about in the live stream, I have yet to hear a really good case for why this is why the U.S. has this base, right? A lot of people have said, oh, it's in support of the U.S. Operation Inherent Resolve, fighting ISIS, destroying the ISIS elements still in Syria. And sure, okay, but surely the U.S. would acknowledge that this important operation where our men and women are putting their lives on the line, the DoD is going to tell us what exactly is happening here. Oh, no, they're not. No, they're not. Video unavailable. And as you can see, the last update for airstrikes was 2017. Cost of operation, 2017. ISIS area of operation, 2017. So in 7 years, the U.S. hasn't updated any of their maps about Inherent Resolve. So whatever these guys are doing here, the DoD has done a really bad job, and the Pentagon have done a terrible job of doing this, right? Here's U.S. Central Command's website about Inherent Resolve, and you can see nothing. They've taken everything off of the public site. So again, I see these things, and I am just like, I just want to see a cohesive reason, right? You go to inherentresolve.mil, the domain name isn't even registered. Guys, the Pentagon has $70 billion trillion dollars. They can afford to keep your domains registered on a .mil domain. Nobody else is going to buy it. So this sort of thing is, to me, a sign that, yeah, I think the U.S. should ask some hard questions about whether the risks of having these extremely forward bases are offering us a meaningful return or are putting our troops needlessly at risk on a tactical level. I'm not saying that we say, oh, we give up. Like, no, but like, ask ourselves, is Tower 22 in the middle of the fucking desert? Is this really the place? Is this really the can't miss it, can't be without it? Like, look, guys, here's the base. I get it. It's a staging area for some aircraft. But just look at what strategic interests it's protecting here. There's nothing. It's in 1,000 miles of empty desert, right? It sort of is supporting TANF, this base TANF, which this is actually, it's been like blurred out, right? There's a very much larger U.S. presence in and around TANF, but we just can't seem to show it. It may be this base here, but that's the takeaway, is that, they're like, oh, the reason this base is here is to support this other base. And why is this base here? Well, it's for Inherent Resolve, an operation that is so trivial to the DoD that we can't even tell the public we can't even give the public like the broad overview of what's happening. So I think there needs to be tactical mitigations done. There needs to be some operational mitigations, really bring the fight back to this militia. Finally, there needs to be an evaluation of what is the risk to reward on the U.S. strategic interests in the region. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Thank you so much. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to tell that YouTube algorithm that I make good content. Thank you to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members. You guys know tomorrow, new uncensored combat video dropping on Combat Vet News. See you in the next one. Cheers.